We had to move that. I like to pace, and I run into Tom if he sits there and it's too much there. The question today is, what happens when we're dead? No, that's not the question. The question is, what happens if we're dead to the law? What happens if we're dead to the sin? Now, one of my favorite movies is Kelly's Heroes. Clint Eastwood, How Can You Go Wrong? Donald Sutherland, Captain Steubing. Donald Sutherland plays this really whacked out tank driver. He is just plain nuts. And he has this tank mechanic that is just negative. The whole movie, just negative. And Sutherland is just plain crazy, and he keeps saying, why don't you knock it off with them negative waves? Always with the negative waves. He's got this really strange accent, and I don't know why I love this movie, but I do. Especially when Donald Sutherland faces off with a Tiger tank with a huge gun pointing straight at him, and he gets out his sidearm and he flips open the holster like he's going to duel with it. You know, it's crazy. Always with the negative waves. Well, Paul has been dealing negative waves about sin and the law throughout the book of Romans. He has just been wave after wave against the law, and it comes to a head in this particular paragraph where Paul tells us what our relationship to the law is. And it is kind of a negative kind of thing. Paul has argued that possession of the law does not improve Israel's situation before the Lord. You know, if you go to the store and you come home with books instead of groceries, like happens to me a lot, it does not improve my situation at home. Good words to remember, Marshall. Books are not a replacement for groceries. Good things. Marshall likes to read. The law does not improve our standing before the Lord. It's not the possession of the law that counts. It's the obedience to the law that counts. As any boy with a puppy knows, you know, it's not, the dog doesn't love you if it doesn't come. The dog doesn't love you if it doesn't obey. And we understand that. As a result, the law is unable to justify a person. You cannot be saved by keeping the law. Even if you could keep the law, which you can't, the law was never designed for that purpose in God's eyes. The overall impact of the law has been negative. For one, it stirs our consciousness of sin, so it reminds us that we're all sinners. It brings wrath, because we are pointed out that we have sin, and then it says we're going to be condemned for that, and finally it increases the trespass. You know, it's like the little kid who's told, don't go do that, and the little kid has to do that just because you've said not to do that. This is what happens. It increases the trespass. And so if Christians are going to be free from the tyranny of sin, we also have to be free from the tyranny of the law, using Paul's words, and they're very strong words today. In 7:1 through 6, Paul addresses the negative effects of the law. There are lots of negative effects in the world, but the negative effects of the law are severe. These verses assert that we are no longer under the binding authority of the law. The law has no more claim upon us. And that is absolutely true. Now, there are some provisos there, and it may end up seeming like we're under the law, but we are free from the law. Verses 1 through 3 lead up to the central point in verse 4, and the central point says we are free from the law. And so verses 1 through 3 are an illustration and a clarification of what he means by that. And then 5 through 6 provide further explanation along those lines. Back in chapter 6, Paul has said believers are dead to sin and are set free from sin. And now he's going to say, so we also die to the law and we are set free from the law. So he's paralleling sin and the law because they both end up doing the same thing if that's all we focus on. As freedom from sin leads to serving God, so freedom from the law also leads to bearing fruit, as we will see in verse 4. Freedom from the law leads to serving in the new way of the Spirit and producing the fruit of God, which is a great thing. This is what we want to accomplish. Results of what we do in the Spirit are that we produce fruit. And fruit is all kinds of stuff. It's leading people to the Lord. It's doing good deeds. It's loving. It's everything that we do for the Lord. This section begins with a general principle, and that principle is that the law has authority over a man only as long as he lives. Okay? The law has authority only as long as the man lives. That's the general principle. If a person is dead, so the rabbis said, he is free from the Torah and the fulfilling of the commandments. Actually, they said this, but yeah, that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Now that you know it in the original. Actually, that's a quote from Deuteronomy chapter 6, but I couldn't find this quote in Hebrew, so I just put in something. Verses 2 and 3, though, are not an allegory. Now, they can be looked at as an allegory, and a lot of times people do, but they are more of an illustration. And the reason why I want to bring up that point, it seems like a very minor point, is that the death of the spouse doesn't work as an allegory because it doesn't line up in its points. One of the major ones is that in this verse, it is the death of the husband that brings freedom, but in the application, the believer, not the husband, dies. So how does that work? It doesn't line up as an allegory. It lines up as an illustration. And the main thing is that you are free from the old relationship if one of you dies. And that's the point that Paul wants to make. Some people are interested in knowing how these verses apply to divorce and remarriage in the church. Abby's sitting there going, now, I can't get a divorce, but I can kill him. Okay. She hasn't gotten to that point yet. Wait till next week. We live in this world, and we want to apply these verses to marriage and divorce, and there's some application there, there's some principles there, but that really is not what Paul wants to make clear to us. He's not making statements about marriage and divorce, although there is some application there, but we're not going to talk about that. Paul wants to show that death can bring freedom from the law, and at the same time he says that that new freedom can result in a new relationship. The illustration is that you have a husband and wife, and if the husband passes away, then the wife is free to remarry. There's no condemnation there. There's the chance of a new relationship. And when we get rid of the law, when we are free from the law, we have this chance at a new relationship with Jesus Christ. We are no longer under the law. We no longer serve the law in that way. And we have this chance of a new relationship with Jesus Christ. In verse 4, which is the heart of this paragraph, Paul draws some inferences from verses 1 through 3. He says, believers have died to the law, a death that frees them from the law and enables them to enter this new relationship. Dying means the same here as it did in chapter 6. It means freedom. If we are dead to the law, we are free from it. And we have been set free from that law. This release, accomplished through the body of Christ, is kind of a strange way of saying something, but I think he means that Jesus Christ, through his death on the cross, not his physical body as if it were some conduit, but his death on the cross accomplished this in our life. And we can be free from the law so that we can be free to have this relationship with Christ. And so believers are now able to be joined with Christ. We have killed off all the old world. We have killed off our relationship to sin. We have killed off our relationship to the law. And now we are free to have this relationship with Jesus Christ, a relationship we so desperately want. Now, as back in chapter 6, he was thinking of the Mosaic Law as a power that held people in captivity. He's been talking about sin as a power that enslaves us. And now he talks about the law as a power that enslaves us as well. And so that law needs to be killed off through the old regime. I put that up there because that was an old guy in an old regime. I don't know. This one I understand why I did. All right? If one lives under something's absolute authority, you cannot at the same time serve the Lord. If the one ring rules them all, it has to be destroyed before Frodo can be free. Is that an obtuse reference? How many understood that? How many didn't understand that? Yeah. All right. That's the Lord of the Rings. And the whole point of that whole entire book is that you have to kill off the ring in order to set Frodo free. In order to set us all free. One has to be first released from the law's authority before we can be related to Jesus Christ. We have to